Welcome back this week to Cultural Framing in Later Life Sex. Recognize this room, still bare walls, no pictures. I just moved in, so my office is a little bare. But I promise that next week's lectures, there'll be at least one thing on the wall. That's my goal. All right, so this week we're talking about how we frame sexuality in later life and how that is done culturally. And for us, really, we're going to focus on how that's done in Western society, even though there are a lot of different cultures, and each one has different values about sexuality, which will affect the way that aging sexuality is viewed. All right. So, ageism is alive and well. Ageism is really the context in which we, as a society, have framed later life sex, unfortunately. And ageism has two prongs to it, right? So there are stereotypical or prejudicial attitudes and beliefs about older adults. And then there are discriminatory behaviors that can follow from those beliefs. So those are the two things that are included in ageism. We're going to talk about both the thoughts or myths, stereotypical myths about aging, and also some of the potential behaviors that are a result of that are discriminatory. Okay. Ageism was a term that was coined by Richard Butler, if you didn't know, in 1969, and it's like any other ism, really, except it's aimed at older adults. And in this case, we're going to look at, in particular, how it affects sexuality. So ageism can be from sort of an external source, like from others, from society, from structures like healthcare systems, schools, etc., or it can come from yourself. You can internalize ageist beliefs and not treat yourself or behave in yourself very in some discriminatory ways about sexuality. So where does ageism come from? Well, it comes from your culture. It comes from the values or what society says, right? So what are the cultural representations of sex and aging? So I want you to take a few seconds here and just think about what is sex in our society? How do we define it? What are some of the words that come up when we think about just sex in general? Who gets to do it? What's involved? Who isn't in there? Basically, what is that box that we've drawn around sex and said, this is what's okay and this is what's right, and all this stuff out here is what isn't okay. So when we think about cultural ideas about sex and then how aging fits into that, I just want to show you a few images that are typical of what culture says. So the first one is of an older lady, and she's looking in the mirror, and she's seeing back at herself this young, beautiful, sexy image instead of who she really is. And that usually represents what we want or what we think we should want. The next picture to the right is just of the typical people who are in that privileged box, right? So we look at them and they're young, they're probably fit if we could see their full bodies, likely free of dysfunction, right? So nobody has erectile dysfunction, no one has lubrication or pain problems. It's just simple and easy. They're beautiful, at least conventionally beautiful, which for a lot of times in our society anyway, that means healthy, wealthy, white individuals, certainly heterosexual a lot of times, and particularly the older you get, the more we think that sex should be in that partnered or married box, so no casual relationships, nothing like that. Certainly not for older adults, right? When we think about our own culture. And you can see the joke about the older gentleman down there who is the typical dirty, horny old guy that we think of in society. And with his wife, who is clearly not interested and doesn't want anything to do with that. So when we think about that box, right, older adults are certainly out here, and any older adult who is single, is looking for a casual relationship, who might not be heterosexual, who's cognitively impaired, who's in a nursing home, who is an older woman looking for a younger man. All of those people are outside of our box culturally. which implies that it's not okay. Right? So if a culture dictates what is okay, it frames what is okay about sex, and certainly older adults aren't inside it. So what are some of those myths that we have, or the stereotypical beliefs about older adults and sexuality? Certainly we think that older adults are asexual beings, they're non-sexual, they're not interested in sex, or they shouldn't be. Right, so if they demonstrate any interest in it or want to do it, that's abnormal, that's weird. Stop being a weirdo, that's icky, right? And also there's a gendered expectation there for older men, and they're certainly able to get together with younger women at any time. But if you're an older woman, forget. Liking younger men, that's not something that's okay for you. Older men who engage in sexual relationships are considered virile or powerful, but also dirty, right? So the dirty old man myth. Older women who engage in sex are not moral. They're weird, they're abnormal, because you're not supposed to have sex after menopause, right? You're supposed to lose interest. You're not supposed to like or want to do that, particularly if you're widowed or you've lost your primary partner. Older persons should be segregated by gender in nursing homes. You don't want any funny business, right? So that's the ageist myth that sex is not for people who are institutionalized, right? And that goes away, absolutely, when you enter a nursing home. And a big one here, the last one, older age and sexual dysfunction are synonymous. They're necessarily linked, right? So you can't have one without the other. So these are some of the major myths that we have, and these come from your Hofstadter article, as well as a text by Jennifer Hillman that I don't have that's required for you, but if you're really interested in this topic, email me and ask me for the reference, because it's a great text. So what's wrong with having ageist beliefs about sexuality? Well, the problem is that it has an effect on an individual, and it has an effect on our society, which in turn affects individuals. So internalized ageism is the idea that when we have all of these messages across our lifetime that teach us about what is okay and what isn't okay about sex, that we internalize them. They become normal. And without even thinking about it, we act upon those, right? So there was a couple of individuals who came up with what they called the geriatric sexuality breakdown syndrome. You can see a picture of it here under internalized ageism. Basically, what it's describing is the fact that when we have these ageist beliefs in society and they sort of infiltrate us in our minds and become a part of what we believe and think about ourselves, then we start to behave consistently with them, which for sexuality means a lot of times we see these labels as the dirty old man or the weird older woman who wants sex. We try to distance ourselves from those negative labels, and therefore affect our behaviors, like I don't have sex, I don't talk about it, I try not to think about it, those types of things. Or clearly I couldn't even be able to do it because older people and sexual dysfunction are the same thing. So that's just a kind of a fancy way of explaining how internalized ageism affects our sexuality. Ageism also affects society and others. So the first picture, right, is providers. So we know that providers do endorse stereotypical beliefs or myths about older adults and sexuality. They think they don't do it. They think it's embarrassing to talk about. They don't understand it, so they don't bring it up. And that really affects sexual health, right? So we know that we are seeing a rise in sexually transmitted infections among older adults. And part of the problem is we refuse to talk about it. And as providers, we feel underprepared to be able to do that, as well as embarrassed or having stereotypical beliefs about older adults not wanting to do it. So that's a huge problem that we'll continue to talk about, and how we can change that from happening. Also, it has infiltrated ageist beliefs about aging sexuality, have infiltrated everywhere in the media. So you see it in cards and in movies, and it's part of how we see older adults in prime time, in magazines, and everywhere. So this is just a quote from a comic that I saw. It has two older women and their breasts are sagging, and they've got the gray puffy hair, and one of them is saying, I don't think of them as saggy, I think of them as relaxed fit. So it might be funny or seem innocuous or benevolent in some ways, but it really does have an effect, because it is that sort of subtle message that, you know, things don't work as they should, they don't look like they should, and therefore, you know, I'm outside that box. But there are a lot of other examples in the media. I would have you Google it and just Google aging sexuality and look at the images, or Google aging sexuality and funny and look at the images and you'll find a bazillion. I mean, go into Target and go to the birthday card section and you'll find at least a dozen. But again, we have evidence in the media that we have ageist and stereotypical beliefs about older adults and sexuality that are being reinforced and reinforced in things that we watch, the things that we read. So when we do see older adults in prime time, we usually see it in a very limited scope, and it's usually on one end of the spectrum or the other. So on the spectrums, we have an older adult character. So if they are lucky enough to be seen as sexual, they have to be healthy, wealthy, and attractive and sexy, right? So those people get to be sexual. Sometimes. Otherwise, most of the older adult characters are on the other end of the spectrum, where they're androgynous, asexual, kind of weak, or funny, and we don't see them as being sexual. We don't see them talking about sexuality or, God forbid, engaging in any intimacy, like we see other age groups and in other people. We generally also see a lack of diversity in older adults. You know, so we usually see white, heterosexual, wealthy, older adults in prime time. And certainly if you're going to have sex, you have to be in that box. These portrayals are circumscribed and stereotypical, and they are gendered. So if the older man on prime time is there, he's usually pretty safe. He's more of a romantic than he would be sexual or virile. You may see him flirting or seeking out younger women, or that being funny. Older women on prime time, it's been found that they're more consistently asexual or chaste. They don't really engage in intimate behaviors, and if so, it might be referred to or laughed at, but it's certainly happening behind the scenes, and we don't really get to see it or hear about it. The Blanches and the Golden Girls of the world are the few and the far between, and even Blanche, you know, there was a lot of covering up of the actual sexuality parts. If we have older women in prime time, they usually don't have consistent love interests. They're not dating a lot of times, again, unless it's kind of a funny thing when we're making fun of it. In a study about Canadian print media, they found that there's sort of a tension or a paradox in a lot of ways when they talk about online dating for older adults. So on one side, they're kind of reinforcing it and saying older adults have relationships too, and they can be sexual even if they have problems. But on the other side, they're really reifying youth and beauty and being fit and virile, and there's this tension between that. So older adults are sexual and great, but only if they fit that youthful looking older person who's also virile, right, and wealthy. So it is a hard place to be, because in the middle of that is where most older adults lie, and you often don't see yourself portrayed in any of those depictions. We also see a medicalization of older adults. So what do I mean by that? What happens usually is, if we are allowed to see something in the media about older adults and sexuality, oftentimes we're making it about sexual dysfunction and medicalizing it. So what do? If you can't lubricate, well, you have this handy dandy lubrication that you can ask your doctor about. What do you do if you have erectile dysfunction? Take the blue pill, right? Or another brand of pill that helps you get or maintain an erection. And I don't know about you guys, but the Viagra ads to me are becoming more and more ridiculous. Used to actually be okay when it was kind of a Bob Dole kind of thing, you know, that we had paired with Viagra. In some ways, you know, it was kind of making fun a little bit. But Nowadays, it's like we see these beautiful, probably like 42-year-old women who are like, come on, guys, let's have fun and take the blue pill. And a lot of times the men are very on the young side, but where is the typical older adult? Where is the average older adult who needs or wants to use Viagra or another brand? So we have very limited views also of older adults in those sexual medicine ads as well. So what are some exceptions? When we think about what's out there in TV and in the media, are there any shows or ads, companies who are sort of normalizing older adult sexuality and just portraying it as it is, right? I can think of one, and that's not a lot, but at least I can think of one. And I would challenge you to try to think of ones for yourself. And an assignment too, in fact, you'll get to look at different forms of film or print, or photography, whatever it is, and depicting older adult sexuality and kind of do a critical evaluation of how they're portraying older adult sexuality. So one I will give you is Gracie and Frankie. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it. It's hilarious. And it's also very sex positive for older adults. It's positive for older adults in general. I think it makes it very normal. It's not something unique and it's not something weird. It's just something normal, which is what I think we need to move to. So if you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix, and it has Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda and Martin Sheen, Sam Waterston, and it even portrays an older gay couple in a very normalizing way as well. So that's a unique one that we have out there. So what about the cougar? All right, so the other article that you read about framing sexuality was about the cougar. So take a moment again and think about what comes to mind when you think of the label cougar. Who do you see coming up? What kinds of thoughts do you have about it? Is it a positive one, a negative one? Do we see them, as sort of embracing or celebrating older women's sexuality, or is it more about them being the butt of the joke again? So the cougar is a term, and the history of it is still kind of in flux, and you can see a little of that in the Montemurro and Siefken article, but the term is meant to depict a highly attractive, youthful, moneyed, aggressive, middle-aged to older woman who pursues short and maybe long-term relationships with younger men, at least 15, 20 years younger. And I really liked the way the article talked about this because it couched it in terms of cultural framing, right? That dominant cultural script. So that's what society has said is okay, right, about sexuality and aging. And for the most part, it doesn't happen, it shouldn't happen, and older adults are asexual. Older adult men should be the aggressor, older women should be receptive. And in this case, the cougar label really flies in the face of that dominant cultural script. So you'd think that women of all ages would embrace it, right? So if it flies in the face of our ageist cultural script, isn't it great? Well, women have mixed feelings about it. So in their study, they talked to women of all ages, talked to them about what they thought about the term cougar, and in their reactions, there were a few of them that were supportive. They thought that, wow, a powerful or assertive older woman sexually, that defies the double standard of older men being the only ones who get to have younger relationships. But the majority of the women were really critical about it, which was interesting to me. The more I looked at it, the more it made sense, because we commonly make fun of cougars, right, in society. So if you were called a cougar, or someone you were dating or someone you were interested in was being called a cougar, would that be a positive thing for you? Usually not, right? So we're usually making fun of cougars, with the exception, I think, of being from Sex and the City, when, as seen in the picture, when Samantha was dating the younger man, Smith Jarrett, certainly there was some making fun of, but in general, it was seen as a normal, good relationship. Good for Samantha, right? But they're commonly portrayed negatively in the media. like unhappy, drunks, controlling, overly sexual women, which I think is where a lot of the critical evaluations come from. You know, women thought that they were seen as predatorial and desperate, overly sexed. They also didn't like that some of them seem to think that it actually reinforced a double standard. So I really liked one woman's response to this. She said, so what's a man called who dates a woman 15 years younger? He's called a man, right? So what's a woman called? A cougar, right? So it really does actually reinforce a double standard in a lot of ways, that somehow this is an abnormal thing for women, not necessarily celebrated, but just abnormal, so we have a word for it. Also, a lot of them didn't like it because they thought that it was just seen as negative, right? So I wouldn't want that label, because it's those people are the butt of the joke. They're the women who are doing the wrong thing, right? They're not inside that box, and they're being laughed at because of it. So I think that the cougar has a long way to go before it becomes actually a really empowering label for a lot of women, although some women are very empowered by it and feel like it is a very supportive label that kind of gives them a sense of freedom or power, right? So what's the bottom line about all this stuff? Well, certainly we are really ageist, right, about sexuality, and most of you probably came into this course knowing that, but we need better dominant cultural scripts. We need better ways that we can depict aging sexuality, messages that are across society that reinforce, normalize aging, like in Gracie and Frankie, like I had mentioned. It's not weird or super great. It's just normal. It's as if it would be like watching any other person being sexual or intimate or thinking about it or being it yourself. You just want that to kind of be a normal thing, not a huge bump in the road, right? So what do we need to do? We need to do some myth busting. Certainly for healthcare providers, and those of you who work at all in gerontology right now, which many of you do, probably understand that this is the case. You know, a lot of times people think that older adult sexuality is, you know, disgusting or shouldn't be done, or that doesn't happen, or it shouldn't happen, and that's in line with our ageist cultural frame, right? So as we mentioned with providers, that really affects the way that older adults are treated. So they're not getting asked about their sexuality or their sexual health, and that's having real repercussions. So we need to do some myth busting with providers and educating and training them on how to talk about sexuality and normalize it to their older adult patients, so that it's just a normal part of, or a routine part of the appointment. We certainly also need to expand that box, right, of sexuality, be more inclusive as opposed to prescriptive and exclusive about who can be sexual. And part of doing that is getting it outside of that dysfunction only, age equals dysfunction, age equals asexual myth, into a sexual well-being, and here's all of the things that are incorporated into sexual wellness. Doesn't matter if you have sexual dysfunction or if you're 85, 95, 15 or otherwise. Here are all of the things that can be included that include wellness for you. And that is really where we're headed next. So after talking about the cultural frame of sexuality, we're going to talk about sexual well-being and how we can kind of broaden or expand our idea of sexuality to be more inclusive to more people, and in particular to older adults. All right, that's it for this one. I'll see you on the flip side of sexual well-being, and have a good couple of days.